There's something about hospitals at night that never felt right to me. The silence, the dim, flickering lights, the way the halls stretch on forever, swallowing sound. But a morgue? That's an entirely different kind of wrong. I had just started my clinical rotations when I was assigned my first overnight shift at St. Augustine Hospital's morgue. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just logging reports, checking on stored bodies, and assisting with any unexpected arrivals. No big surgeries, no life or death situations, just a cold, quiet room filled with people who weren't going anywhere. At least, that's what I thought. The morgue was in the basement, past a long, windowless corridor that reeked of antiseptic and something else. Something stale like air that hadn't moved in years. The moment I stepped inside, a chill ran through me. The room was dimly lit, the overhead fluorescence buzzing faintly. Stainless steel drawers lined the walls, each labeled with a small white tag. I wasn't alone. An older man, Mr. Hargrove, was the night technician. He barely looked up from his desk when I arrived, his gaunt face illuminated by the dull glow of a desk lamp. "First time?" he muttered, scribbling something in a logbook. I nodded. He smirked. "It's quiet down here. Just follow the checklist. Don't touch what you don't need to. And if you hear anything weird, ignore it." I forced a chuckle. "Weird like what?" His eyes met mine for the first time. "You'll see." And with that, he handed me a clipboard and left. I was alone. For the first hour, nothing happened. I walked through the routine, checking inventory, logging names, making sure all the doors were sealed. The bodies were cold, silent, until they weren't. I was standing by drawer number 7, scanning my checklist, when I noticed something off. The condensation on the stainless steel. The faint imprint of fingers smudged against the inside of the drawer's small glass window. I frowned, leaning closer. The metal was cold, but inside, the corpse was sweating. My breath caught. That wasn't possible. I wiped a hand across my face, trying to reason it away. Maybe the cooling system malfunctioned. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. And then, the knock. A soft, deliberate tap against the inside of the drawer. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave, but my body refused to move. Another knock, louder this time. I glanced at the tag. Male, mid-40s, cardiac arrest. Pronounced dead 9:14 p.m. I swallowed hard. What if they got it wrong? My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle. Slowly, I pulled the drawer open. The body was still. Eyes closed. No movement. But the sheet covering it was damp, clinging to the contours of his form. I hesitated, then gritted my teeth and pulled the sheet back. The man's face was pale, lips slightly parted as if caught mid-breath. My pulse hammered in my ears as I reached for his wrist, pressing 2 fingers against the skin. Cold. Completely lifeless. Relief washed over me just for a second. Maybe I imagined the knocking. Maybe my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then I saw it. A crumpled piece of paper stuffed into the corpse's clenched fist. With shaking hands, I pried his fingers apart and unfolded it. The paper was yellowed, fragile, like it had been there for decades. In jagged handwriting, only 6 words were scrawled across the page. "Now, you're part of this too." I dropped the note like it burned me. My chest tightened, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. But my legs stayed rooted to the cold, sterile floor. The words on the paper weren't old. The ink was fresh. Someone had written this recently. I forced myself to look at the body again. It hadn't moved. No breath, no twitch, nothing. Just a cold, unmoving corpse with a message clenched in its dead fingers. 1,000 thoughts slammed through my mind. Had someone put this note there before? Was this some kind of sick joke? Had Hargrove done this to mess with me? I needed answers. Grabbing the clipboard, I checked the name again. Victor Holloway. Official time of death, 9:14 p.m. His autopsy had been scheduled for tomorrow morning. I turned toward Hargrove's desk, my shoes echoing against the tiled floor. The morgue suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, pressing in on me from all sides. But before I could take another step, the radio crackled. The old speaker mounted on the wall hissed with static. And then, a voice. It was low, garbled, barely a whisper beneath the interference. But I recognized it. Help me. My blood ran ice cold. I whipped around, staring at drawer 7. The body hadn't moved, but the air felt wrong, charged, electric, like a storm building inside the walls. Then, as if in response to my fear, the lights flickered, and I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't sure when I first felt it, that presence, that weight in the room that hadn't been there before, but I knew I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. The overhead light flickered violently, casting long, shifting shadows across the steel drawers. And for a split second, just before the light steadied, I saw it. A figure. Tall, motionless, standing in the far corner of the morgue. It wasn't Hargrove. It wasn't human. Its shape was wrong, stretched, like its limbs didn't fit inside its own skin. Its face, God, I can't even describe it. Not fully. But what I do remember, its eyes, hollow, deep, watching me. My breathing hitched. I couldn't move. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but I felt like a fly caught in a web, completely paralyzed. The thing in the corner tilted its head, just slightly, like it knew I saw it. Then the drawer slammed shut behind me. I jumped, my heart slamming against my ribs. And in that split second of terror, the figure was gone. The silence was deafening. My body finally unlocked and I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I needed to get out, now. I bolted for the exit, fumbling for the handle, only to realize something horrifying. The door was locked from the outside. I pounded against it. Hargrove, let me out! Nothing. Then, from behind me, a slow, deliberate knock. I turned. Drawer number 7 was open again, and the body was sitting upright. My breath caught in my throat. Victor Holloway, the dead man, was sitting upright inside the drawer. His head was tilted downward, his damp hospital gown clinging to his body. His arms hung limply at his sides. He wasn't moving. Not yet. I wanted to scream, to do something, anything, but my body refused to obey. Then, in a single, unnatural motion, his head snapped up. His eyes were open. I choked on my own breath. The pupils were black, completely black, as if whatever made this thing human had been sucked out, leaving only an empty husk. And then he smiled. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was wet, gurgling, like his throat was still full of blood. I stumbled backward, slamming into a metal tray, sending instruments clattering to the floor. My mind was screaming run, but my legs had turned to cement. Victor began to move, swinging his legs over the edge of the drawer. His joints cracked like old, rusted hinges. "You opened the door." His voice was a whisper now, his dead eyes locked onto mine. Then, something moved behind him. The shadows in the morgue twisted, shifting unnaturally like something was crawling out from the darkness itself. And in that moment I knew. Victor wasn't the thing I should be afraid of. The room went black, not just dark, black. A void swallowed everything, pulling the morgue into some kind of nightmare. The air thickened, pressing against my skin, making it harder to breathe. And then came the voices. He let it in. Another one marked. No escape. They whispered from every direction, curling around me like invisible fingers. Then a hand on my shoulder. I spun, swinging wildly, but hit nothing but air. The darkness pulsed, and for the briefest second, the emergency lights flickered back on. And something stood in the doorway. Not Victor. Not Hargrove. Something wrong. It was tall, its arms too long, its face stretched into something that barely resembled a man. But the worst part? It was watching me. It knew me. The thing lurched forward, and I did the only thing I could. I ran. I didn't care where. I just knew I needed to get out. But the morgue wasn't the same anymore. The hallway that had led me inside was gone, replaced by rows and rows of steel drawers, stretching endlessly in every direction. There was no exit, only doors, and I had no idea which one was real. I ran. The air grew thicker with every step, pressing against my skin like a living thing. My shoes slapped against the cold tile, echoing in the endless rows of steel drawers. Every time I turned a corner, the morgue shifted, the walls closing in, twisting into something not meant for the living. Behind me, the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, and breathing. Shallow, hollow, right behind me. I turned a corner and froze. There, at the end of the corridor, a single door stood open. Not a morgue drawer. A real wooden door, standing in stark contrast to the sterile steel surroundings. A way out. But as I sprinted toward it, a hand shot out from the darkness, gripping my wrist with impossible strength. I didn't have to turn to know what it was. It was him. Victor Holloway. His fingers dug into my skin, nails splitting flesh. His mouth was moving, but the words he spoke weren't his own. "You let it in?" I yanked my arm free, ignoring the pain, and lunged for the door. Behind me, the thing that had been Victor let out a ragged, inhuman shriek, so loud it rattled the walls. I didn't look back. I slammed the door shut behind me, and everything went silent. I woke up in the hospital. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of antiseptic burned my nose. My arm throbbed where Victor had grabbed me, my skin bruised but intact. Hargrove stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed. His face was unreadable. "You're lucky," he muttered. I swallowed, my throat dry. What happened?" He sighed. "You collapsed. Security found you outside the morgue. No one knows how you got out." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to acknowledge what really happened. But he just turned to leave. Before he stepped out, he hesitated, just for a second. "Whatever you saw down there," his voice was lower now, almost cautious. "Don't go looking for answers." And then he was gone. I should have listened, because when I looked down at my wrist, at the place where Victor had grabbed me, there, burned into my skin like a bruise that would never fade, were 6 words. "Now you're part of this too." The subway at night is nothing like the rush hour madness. It's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing, feel the weight of the emptiness around you. I've worked night shifts at the subway for years, and I know every sound, every flickering light, every shadow cast by the aging metal. But that night, something was off. It was past 2 a.m., and I was doing my final walkthrough before heading home. The platform was empty, just like it should be. But as I reached the far end of the station, I stopped. There was a train car at the very edge of the platform, completely dark. That wasn't right. No trains were supposed to be there. The air around it felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't explain, just feel. My first thought, a mistake. Maybe it was left behind after maintenance. But then I saw her. A woman sat alone inside the car. Motionless, she was in the farthest seat, her face barely visible in the dim light filtering in from the station. I frowned. "Ma'am? The station's closing soon." No reaction. I tapped my radio. Static. Of course. The doors to the train car stood slightly open, just enough to invite me inside. Something told me not to. But when you work a job like mine, you don't ignore a lone passenger sitting in an abandoned train. So I took a step forward, and another. Then I crossed the threshold. The second my foot hit the floor, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just cold, it felt like I had stepped into a different place entirely, like the air itself had changed. I cleared my throat. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She sat perfectly still, hands resting on her lap. Her skin, pale, almost sickly under the faint light. I moved closer, my footsteps muffled by the eerie silence of the train. "Ma'am?" That's when she finally reacted. Her head tilted slightly toward me, not in a normal way. Too slow, too precise. Then she spoke. A whisper so faint I barely caught it. "Behind you." Every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But I did. And what I saw? The train car wasn't empty anymore. It was full of people, sitting, perfectly still, staring. And every single one of them had pitch black eyes. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. The people in the train car weren't just sitting, they were watching me. Motionless, expressionless. Their pitch black eyes locked onto me like I wasn't supposed to be there. A suffocating silence filled the car. No shuffling, no breathing, no distant hum of the subway system. Nothing. I forced myself to swallow. My legs felt like lead, but I managed to take a slow step back. The woman, the one who whispered, hadn't moved, but her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something else. I didn't wait to hear it. I turned on my heel and lunged toward the exit. But the doors, the same ones I walked through seconds ago, were shut. I slammed my hands against them. "Open up!" Nothing. The glass reflected the passengers behind me, unmoving, watching, closer than before. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, in the reflection, one of them stood up. A slow scraping sound filled the air as the figure behind me dragged their feet forward. I spun around just in time to see a man, gaunt, hollow-eyed, in an old, tattered suit, taking another step. Then, another. His jaw unhinged slightly like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. And then, the rest of them started standing up. Not all at once. One by one. Deliberate. Unnatural. I slammed my fist into the doors. "Come on, open, open!" No response. I risked a glance back. They were closer. I pressed my back to the door, chest heaving, my fingers desperately searching for the emergency release latch. And then, the lights inside the train flickered. For a fraction of a second, in the brief flashes of darkness, their faces changed. Their skin melted away. Their hollow sockets gaped open. Their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. The flickering stopped. They were right in front of me, and I felt cold breath on my neck. I did the only thing I could. I squeezed my eyes shut. If I looked at them for one more second, I knew, I just knew, something would happen. Something worse. The air around me turned dense, pressing against my skin like I was standing at the bottom of the ocean. And then, a whisper, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't be here." My body jolted. My eyes snapped open. The train lurched forward. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. The second the doors slammed open, I threw myself out. I hit the platform hard, rolling onto the cold tile. Pain shot up my arm, but I didn't care. I scrambled up and turned to look. But the train, it was gone. No screeching wheels. No gust of wind from its departure. Just empty tracks. Like it was never there. My breathing was ragged. My heart pounded against my ribs. For a long moment I just stood there, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. Then I heard voices behind me. It was my co-workers. Two of them, Miguel and Thomas, standing near the security office, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. I turned, panting, pointing at the tracks. "Did you see that? The train, there was a train here." Miguel frowned. "What train?" "The one right there." I gestured wildly. Dark car, a woman inside, and... I stopped myself, because I knew. They hadn't seen anything. Thomas folded his arms. "That track's been closed off for years. There's no train scheduled for this station past midnight." Miguel shot him a look. "You don't think he saw?" Thomas's face darkened. He shook his head, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. Miguel sighed and turned to me. "Listen, There used to be a train like that. He rubbed the back of his neck. Years ago, before you started working here, there was an accident, a faulty switch. A train derailed, crashed at the end of this very platform. He hesitated, then quietly. No one made it out. A chill ran down my spine. Thomas finally spoke, voice tight. And the weird thing, that specific train car, the last one, it was supposed to be sent to the scrapyard, but every few years, someone sees it. Miguel nodded. Usually a night shift worker, always parked at the far end, always with that same woman inside. I felt my throat go dry. And the passengers? Miguel hesitated. They were never found, but people say when the car reappears, he swallowed. They're still looking for a way out. I didn't sleep that morning, and I never worked another night shift again. I've worked night shifts before. Long, quiet hours in empty buildings, just me, a handful of security monitors, and the occasional creak of an old ventilation system. I always told myself there was nothing to fear, nothing supernatural anyway. But this place was different. The first night at Windsor Tower, a 30-story corporate building downtown, should have been uneventful. Just another job, just another paycheck. But within the first hour, I knew something was wrong. The elevator doors opened on their own. The air felt heavier than it should. And the worst part, I kept getting this feeling. You know when you sense someone watching you, but there's no one there? That. At first, I chalked it up to nerves. New building, unfamiliar sounds. I made my rounds, checking each floor, making sure the doors were locked. Everything seemed normal, until I checked the cameras. There, on the 27th floor, a figure stood motionless in the hallway. A tall, shadowy silhouette, facing the camera, looking directly at me. My first thought, an intruder. Someone had managed to slip in past security. My stomach tightened as I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the elevator. By the time the doors slid open on the 27th floor, the hallway was completely empty. I walked slowly, scanning every corner, every doorway. No movement, no sound. I even checked the emergency stairs. Nothing. Back in the security room, I rewound the footage, searching for answers. The video showed me walking into the hallway, my flashlight cutting through the dim light. And then, the figure vanished. No movement, no turning away. Just gone. Like it was never there to begin with. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. I should have left right then, but I didn't, and that was my first mistake. The next night I showed up for work telling myself it was just a glitch. Maybe the cameras lagged, maybe I imagined it. But deep down, I knew better. I kept a close eye on the monitors, scanning every floor, watching for movement. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Just the usual emptiness of a corporate building after dark. Then, at 2:47 a.m., I saw it again. The figure, lower this time. 25th floor, same posture, same eerie stillness. But now, closer to the camera. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to go up there again, but this was my job. So I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the elevator. The ride up felt longer this time, like the building itself didn't want me to reach that floor. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out, bracing myself. Empty. Again. I checked everything. Offices, storage rooms, bathrooms. Nothing. But as I turned to head back, I noticed something new. The camera in the hallway was facing the wrong way. Someone, or something, had moved it. I stared at the camera, my pulse hammering. This wasn't my imagination. Someone had been here. But where were they now? A soft click echoed down the hall. I turned sharply, flashlight beam shaking slightly. The noise had come from the stairwell door. It was open. I took slow, cautious steps forward, listening for movement. The hallway was dead silent. The air was too still. Then, footsteps. Not from in front of me, behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was still empty. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the corridor, and stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, trapping me inside that metal box, and as I descended to the lobby, I could feel it, that presence, watching me, waiting. I should have quit that night, walked out and never looked back, but I didn't. Instead, I spent my next shift glued to the monitors, watching, waiting, dreading. For hours, nothing happened. No movement, no shadowy figures, just the silent, empty hallways. Then at 3:33 a.m. the cameras glitched, just for a second. A flicker of static. And when the screen cleared, the figure was on the first floor, right outside the security room. I couldn't breathe. It was too close now, too real. My hands hovered over the keyboard, ready to rewind the footage, when I noticed something on the screen. My own reflection. The live feed showed the security room, me sitting at the desk. But behind me, a figure, tall, still, watching. It was inside the room with me. I turned so fast my chair almost toppled over, but there was nothing there. My breath came in short gasps. I needed to get out. Now. I reached for my radio to call for help. The door behind me creaked open. I spun around, my stomach twisting. The door to the hallway was wide open. I hadn't touched it. The monitors flickered again. Static rolled across the screens, distorting the images of the empty halls. My heart pounded as I backed away, my body screaming to run. Then the static cleared, and every single camera feed showed the same thing, the figure. Dozens of them, standing in every hallway, in every corridor, facing the cameras, all looking at me. The room went ice cold. My breath came out in short, shaky gasps. Then one by one, the cameras began to shut off. I grabbed my things and bolted. Didn't even clock out, just ran. As I reached the front doors, I glanced back at the monitors one last time. Only one screen was still on, the security room feed. And on the screen, in glitching, distorted letters, "You saw me." I don't know what I saw in that building. I don't know if it was a ghost, a glitch, or something worse. But I do know one thing. It saw me too. And somehow, I don't think it's done watching. It was past 2 a.m. and I was dead tired. My shift had been long, filled with the usual mix of drunk passengers, awkward small talk, and the occasional eerie silence of the empty streets. I was about to call it a night when a new ride request popped up. The pickup location. A stretch of highway outside town. No houses, no gas stations, just a long, dark road cutting through miles of trees. I hesitated. Everything in me said to ignore it. But then I saw the fare, double the usual rate. It was enough to justify one last ride before heading home. I accepted. As I approached the location, my headlights carved through the darkness. The road was empty. Just me, the trees, and an unsettling fog rolling in from the sides. My stomach twisted, and I checked the app again. Still marked as waiting for pickup. Then, out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the fog. A man. He stepped into the glow of my headlights, his face pale, his shirt damp with sweat. His eyes were wide, darting around as if expecting something, or someone, to jump out of the trees. He didn't walk to the car. He ran. He yanked open the door, slid into the back seat, and slammed it shut. "Drive," he muttered. His voice was barely a whisper. Something about him made my skin crawl, but I'd dealt with plenty of weird passengers before. Drunks, tweakers, people running from bad situations. I just needed to get him to his destination. I tapped the screen to start the ride. Where to? Anywhere but here. I swallowed hard. That was not the answer I wanted. I pulled onto the highway, keeping my eyes on the road, but my mind was racing. Who was this guy? Why was he sweating like he'd just run a marathon? And why did he keep looking over his shoulder? The silence stretched too long. I cleared my throat. Rough night? His breath hitched. He didn't answer right away. Then, so softly I almost missed it, he said, "I saw what he did. He knows I saw." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at the mirror. His hands were trembling. His lips parted like he wanted to say more, but then he snapped his mouth shut and shook his head. The weight in my chest grew heavier. I wanted to press him for details, ask who he was, but something told me I wouldn't like the answer. Then a flash of light filled my car. I checked the mirror. A black car had appeared behind us, its headlights burning bright. Too bright. The driver flashed them once, then again. The man in my backseat let out a shaky breath. "No, no, no, no." He shrank down, his hands gripping his knees. He found me. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Who found you?" The car behind us sped up. Its lights flashed again. And that's when I knew. Whoever was in that car wasn't just following us. They were hunting him. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pressed the gas. The car behind us matched my speed. The black sedan's headlights flared again, but this time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a message. They were coming for him. "Listen, man," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "If you're in some kind of trouble, you don't understand." He cut me off, voice shaking. "You can't stop. You can't let him catch us." I didn't need to be told twice. I gripped the wheel tighter and swerved into the left lane, hoping to shake them, but the car behind us did the same. Faster, closer. Then, bam! They rammed my bumper. My car lurched forward. I clenched my teeth and fought to keep control. The guy in my backseat let out a broken breath. He won't stop. If he gets close enough, I'm dead. I glanced at the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with fear. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just some paranoid passenger running from a bad deal. This was life or death. I took a sharp turn onto a side road, tires screeching. The black sedan hesitated for a moment before following. My hands were slick on the wheel. "Do you know who's in that car?" Silence, then barely a whisper. "He isn't human." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe he was just delusional, paranoid from lack of sleep, drugs, something. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong about this. The car behind us closed in again. My chest tightened. I couldn't outrun them forever. I spotted a gas station up ahead, one of those 24-hour stops with flickering neon signs and an empty parking lot. An idea sparked. I slammed the brakes. Tires screeched. The black car swerved to avoid hitting me, skidding past as I veered sharply into the gas station lot. I killed the engine, held my breath. The black sedan stopped in the middle of the road. Its headlights glowed like twin eyes in the darkness. I turned to tell my passenger we had a chance to escape, but he was gone. The seatbelt was still fastened. The door never opened. He had just vanished. My breath hitched. I whipped around, scanning the back seat. Empty. But then, something caught my eye. Lying on the seat, right where he had been sitting, was a small, worn leather wallet. With shaking fingers, I picked it up and flipped it open. Inside was an ID, a driver's license. The face on it was unmistakable. It was him, and the name printed at the top sent a cold shiver down my spine, because I had seen it before, in the news, on a missing persons report, dated 3 days ago. My hands trembled as I stared at the ID. 3 days ago. That's when he went missing. But that wasn't possible. He had just been in my car. I had heard his voice, seen the fear in his eyes. I swallowed hard and checked the ID again, desperate for some kind of mistake. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but then I noticed something else. The ID was damp. The edges curled slightly, like it had been sitting in water. and there was a faint metallic smell clinging to the leather. Blood. My stomach twisted. The black car. The chase. The way he vanished without a sound. I turned back toward the road. The sedan was gone, vanished into the night like it had never been there at all. I should have left right then, should have driven home, locked my doors, and forgotten this ever happened. But I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my phone and searched his name, and there it was. Man found dead near Highway 47, police investigating. The article didn't say much, just that his body had been discovered 2 days after he was last seen alive. No suspects, no clear cause of death, just gone. I read it twice, 3 times. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. How was I supposed to explain this? I had picked up a man who wasn't supposed to exist, and now I had proof. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car, gripping that ID, trying to convince myself that this was all some kind of elaborate mistake. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just exhausted. But then, my phone buzzed. A new notification from my rideshare app. Ride complete. Please rate your passenger. My breath caught in my throat. That wasn't possible. The app never marked a ride as complete unless the passenger reached their destination. With a shaking hand, I tapped the notification. The screen loaded, and my blood ran cold. The name on the ride history. It was his. The man who had been dead for 3 days. The app gave me the usual 5-star rating options, the thank you for riding message. But there was one thing that didn't belong. A note from the passenger. Just 4 words. He's still watching me. My phone slipped from my fingers, and for the first time since that night began, I felt truly afraid, because I realized something. That black car wasn't chasing us. It was chasing him, and I had just given him a ride straight into the unknown.